Good afternoon and welcome to CSA Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on religion and society, which is a part of semester 2 BA multidisciplinary program, and this is a prescribed part of the university syllabus. And to repeat again, we are following the syllabus, the readings from the syllabus to understand the sociology of religion and society. Today we are going to discuss on myths and rituals associated with death. Now, rituals forms an important part of religion in all communities, and there are different ways in which rituals associated with different parts of life like funerals, marriage, birth are studied by sociologists and anthropologists. And it helps us not only to understand the elements of religion and belief system, but it also helps us to tells us a lot about the structures of the society, the economy, the transformations taking place, and we can weave a story of the community. A number of anthropologists have studied the death rituals in different society, and today we are going to refer to Cyrus Porboin article on the Parsi Zoroastrian myth and rituals. Now, we are going to focus specifically on this essay by Porboin, where he is trying to understand the problems associated with death and dying, and how the community makes sense through both myths and realities, and also understands the fear that is associated in the community with a declining number and the transformations taking place. So, let us today understand the Parsi Zoroastrian myths and rituals, some problems of the relevance for death and dying. Cyrus R. Pangborn points out that in the Parsi Zoroastrian tradition, it's a complex system designed to manage the profound anxiety associated with death and spiritual pollution. The Parsi rituals are not a single event but a long-term process. They are designed to begin before death, and it continues indefinitely. The rituals last as long as the living descendants maintain a respectful memory of the deceased. So, here we see that in sociology of religion, we know that death is associated with a lot of pollution, and therefore there are a lot of rituals which are associated with purifying the space and the individual involved in it. And the second relevant point that is here is the connection or the network with the dead person and its descendants. So, it's a kind of a network. It is not something that it's someone dies and it comes to an end. It's a lifelong process, and therefore several points in life in one's individual's life, rituals are performed to both get aware of the fears associated with it, and also to sense of making individuals and life more purified. So, here Porboin talks on the death and how it is viewed by the Parsi community. So, death is not viewed merely as a natural transition, but as a moment of intense anxiety. This stems from the Zoroastrian belief in dualism, the battle between good and the evil. So, even if we kind of compare it to the Hinduism, even there we have this dualism between the good and the evil, and there is a connection. Even if you've lost, a lot of depends on the good karma and the bad karma. So, both the deceased and the survivors are considered to be under immediate threat by evil forces, specifically the Nasus, which is a term from the community, and it implies the demon of corruption. Rituals are performed to protect the living from contagion and to safeguard the soul of the dead as it moves towards the afterlife. So, there is an kind of dualism between the evil forces taking place and kind of spreading. Contagious means it spreads, the evilness spreads, and therefore rituals comes in to kind of purify, so to kind of have a disconnect with the devil. Here he refers to the Tower of Silence, which is referred as the Dakma. And Pangborn notes that while many summaries of Parsi rites focus only on the Tower of Silence, this is just one part of the complex system. The Dakma is used for the deposition of corpse, to avoid polluting the good creations of earth, fire and water. To non-Zoroastrians, the use of dogma, which is where the bodies are exposed to the sun and birds of prey, is often the most striking of or atypical features of faith. And therefore, when we look into death rituals, as it could be in any other community, in the Zoroastrian community as well, there's a lot of fears associated with it. And Pagborn, that is the author of this particular article, delves into the tension between the ancient Zoroastrian law and the modern survival of the Parsi community. He explores how ritual designed to manage the pollution of death may actually be contributing to a new kind of anxiety, the fear of cultural and demographic extinction, because it's kind of already a community with lesser population. So death is also it brings in a new fever, that there is one more less, that is the demography of the community is declining, and that fear is both at the individual level as well as the corporate level. So he distinguishes between two types of fear within the Parsi community. The first is individual death. The cultus, which is the system of ritual, is designed to manage the anxiety of the soul's transition and protect survivor from spiritual contagion. While archaic, these rituals are considered acceptable if they successfully allay the survivor's fear. And the second fear is corporate extinction. There is a growing fear that the Parsi community itself is dying out. Pagborn notes that the very rituals meant to preserve purity are seen by critics as barriers to survival, while the orthodox argue that extinction is a result of not following these rules strictly enough. So there is a kind of a conflict in terms of also understanding death and the decline of the members of the community. Then he moves to understand the evolution of the purity laws. Pagborn traces the origin of obsessive anxiety regarding pollution back through three distinct layers of scriptures. And these scriptures layers, the number one is the Gathas. And the Gathas are basically original hymns by Zoroaster. And what is the view on pollution or purity? It says focus on moral stewardship, no mention of cultic corruption of the elements. The second scriptural text is the Yasna, which is the lately priestly composition about pollution and purity. It includes the Gathas, begins to formalize ritual, but is yet not obsessive. And the third scriptural text is the Videvdat. This is the Leviticus of the Parsis, and it introduces rigid laws on pollution, the Dagma, which is the exposure of the dead, and the ritual use of the dog, which in the Parsi and Zoroastrian community is referred as the Sagdid. Now, a central point of Pagborn analysis is the disconnection between Zoroaster's original teaching and later practices. So, there is a lot of transformation and changes even in the way these scripts have handed down to the and has been interpreted. Here the distinction is between the two kind of schools of thoughts. The first is the reformer. Zoroaster like swept away many primitive superstitious beliefs during his lifetime. The median Magi, after Zoroaster, the priestly class, that is the Magi, likely reintroduced older aboriginal Persian customs such as the exposure of the corpse and claimed Zoroaster's authority to legitimize them. And the third is the Sassanid Renaissance. Following centuries of foreign rule after Alexander Great, that is 330 BC, the Sassanid Empire in AD 220 attempted to reconstruct the Avestas or the scriptural text. However, they only managed to record about 1/4 of the original based on the memories of priests who were many generations removed from the source, and therefore there could be divergence from the original details in the scriptures. Pagborn emphasizes that the core of Parsi's funeral rite is the protection of the four holy elements of nature. Because death in the Zoroastrian community is seen as the work of evil, a corpse is considered the ultimate source of pollution, and therefore death rituals help us to kind of protect the four elements. The first is earth, which cannot be polluted by burial. The second is fire, which cannot be polluted by cremation. Water, which cannot be polluted by immersion. Air, protected through the specific architecture design of the dogma. The Videvad is the primary source for the rituals that non-Zoroastrian finds most unusual. It transformed a morally sensitive concern for nature into a rigorous system of penance and purification that continues to define Parsi's identity today, even as it creates modern debate over the community's future. Zoroastrian thought have survived through periods of exile and isolation, emphasizing a remarkable degree of theological conservatism. Despite the geographic split between the Zoroastrian who stayed in Iran and those who fled to India, that is the Parsis, the core rituals remained almost identical due to a rigorous effort to maintain scriptural purity. Here is an overview of the historical bridges that preserved these traditions. The first is the Pahlavi period, which is 9th century. Even after the fall of the Sassanid Empire to Muslim forces in AD 6041, Zoroastrian scholarship flourished in the Vulgate language Pahlavi. These texts expanded upon the rigid laws of the Vedanta. And what are the things which were preserved? First is the Dinkard, which is often called an encyclopedia of the Zoroastrian. The second is the Niragyastan, which is the ritual codes focusing specifically on priestly duties. And the third is the Dadistan Ding, which is a series of religious rulings and answers to questions about the faith. These were some of the religious texts which were kind of retained. The second historical evolution that the author talks about is the Parsi migration and the Rivayat. In 8th century, a group of Zoroastrian migrated to India to escape religious restriction, and they were then known as Parsis. Over centuries of isolation, they feared they were pragmatically adapting or losing the original essence of their rituals. The Rivayat, that is from 15th to 18th centuries, these were a series of epistle or letter exchanged between the Parsi community in India and the remaining Zoroastrians in Persia. The third historical epoch is the immense conservatism of the faith. Pangborn science scholar Mary Boyce to emphasize that Zoroastrianism is one of the most conservative religions in the world. And why is he doing so? Because he talks about the continuity. The basic lineaments of thought have remained consistently Avestan. That implies it is based on ancient scriptures. Second, there is a lack of deviation. Because of the Rivayat and the shared Pahlavi literature, the Parsi community in India and the native Persian Zoroastrian, that is the Irani community, follow essentially the same body of scripture and rituals practices today. Then the author talks about the mythological landscape. So, after discussing the historical preservation of faith, Pangborn shifts his attention to the mythological landscape of the afterlife. He highlights a critical evolution. The transition from Zoroaster's simple ethical golden rule to the complex supernatural bureaucracy of the later Avestan period. And here is an analysis of the myth as context for Parsi's death rituals. The first is the Gathic simple plot. In the original teaching of the Zoroaster, that is the Gathas, the afterlife was a direct consequences of individual choice and morality. Success in the afterlife was determined by Humata, Hukta, Havarsa. These are good thoughts, good words and good deeds. That is, Humata means good thoughts, Hukta means good words, and Havasa means good deeds. Then the Chinvat bridge is the conceptual bridge of the requitor. The righteous are led across by Zoroaster himself into the Garo Dimana, that is the house of song or the paradise. The wicked, judged by their own conscience, fall from the bridge into a state of misery, which is termed as the Drujo Dimana or the house of falsehood. So, just your deeds, that is, if you do good deed, you will be sent to the paradise. If you do bad deeds, then you will be into the house of falsehood. Then the later Avasta is the elaborate scenario where Pangborn talks about the concept of the pravasi, or which is adding a layer of protective mysticism to the soul's journey. The higher double implies that every human soul has a pravasi, a prototypical, eternal, heavenly spirit that serves as a guardian and guide during life. Then there is a 3-day vigil. After death, the pravasi hovers over the soul on earth for 3 days. Then comes separation. If the soul is just wicked at the bridge, the pravasi, being inherently pure, abandons it to return to heaven, while the soul descends to hell. Then Pangborn talks about the cult of ancestor, that is the pravasi versus soul. He notes a blurring between the theological definition of a pravasi and the popular memory of the deceased soul. And here he kind of look into the origin and the role after death. So, the entirety is the soul, which is termed as Urvan. The origin is that it is created pure, gains merit or sin via choice. And what is the role after death? It moves towards heaven or hell, helped by the prayer of the living. The second entity is the pravasi, which is eternal, exists before birth. And what is the role after death is that it is the guardian spirit. It enables to return to heaven but can invoke for help. And then after talking about the historical evolution and the mythological, he shifts to understanding the ritual necessity and the curse. The belief in pravasi creates a pragmatic reason for continuation rituals. And here this can be understood by looking into the 10-day festival. At the end of the Zoroastrian year, that is the Muktad or the Hamasva Mithadia, the Pravasis are believed to descend to their physical world. Then the reciprocity, that implies Pravasis delight in being remembered. If the living provide prayers and sacrifice, they receive blessings. If they neglect these duties, they risk the curse of the spirit and the loss of divine protection. Then he talks about the most important thing, which when we look into any kind of rituals to understand what is the functions that these rituals perform, and Pangborn argues that the Parsi death rituals are not just about saying goodbye. They are designed to, number one, protect the soul during the critical 3-day window before it reaches the bridge. Sustain the pravasi through invocation so it continues to protect the living family. Bridge the gap between the Gathic focus on personal morality and later priestly focus on cultic appeasement of spirits. This intermingling of ancestor worship and high theology explains why Parsi rituals are so persistent. However, here the author points out to the tension between belief and practice. Pangborn analysis captures a fascinating theological tug of war. While modern Parsis may intellectually lean towards a simplified monotheistic faith, their ritual behavior tells a different story, one still populated by Asian celestial judges and a deep-seated dread of spiritual corruption. And here he provides a breakdown of the heavenly characters and the tension between the belief and practice. So, the 4 celestial guardians are, while modern Parsis have pruned the crowded Avestan pantheon to avoid the appearance of polytheism, 4 key yazatas, that is the angels or divine being, remain central to the funeral liturgy. They function as a divine legal team for the deceased. The first is the Sarosa, that is the protector, the most critical figure in the immediate aftermath of death. He is the guardian of obedience and the enemy of darkness. He guards the soul for the first 3 nights when it is most vulnerable to demonic attack. The second is the Mitra or the judge, the primary judge of the soul. The third is Rashnu, that is the angel of justice, the one who weighs the soul's deed on a spiritual scale, whether it is good deed or a evil deed. And the fourth is the Astad, that is the angel of truth. He assists in the verification of the soul's life and character. Pangborn points out at a puzzling residue in Parsi's thought. If the golden rule of good thoughts, good work, and good deed is the true passport to heaven, why is extraordinary aid from these angels necessary? And this is a question that he kind of allows the more recent scholars and students of sociology of religion to understand the conflict between the existence of these rituals and the way in which it is practiced. Then he talks about the name of the fear is the pollution. Salvation is a matter of personal merit and divine grace. The rituals, what Parsis actually do, imply that the soul is in grave danger and cannot survive the transition without supernatural intervention. Pangborn argues that the reason the complex rituals of the Vidyavat persist despite modern Demeter theologizing it is a primal fear of pollution. In the Zoroastrian worldview, death is ultimate victory of the counter spirit, that is Angra Manyu. Therefore, there is a kind of a debate between the modern ideal and the ritual reality. A corpse is not just a body. It is the site of the Nasus, that is the demon of corruption. The rituals are less about praying someone into heaven and more about spiritual competition. So then we come to the conclusion of this and say that the fact that funeral rites remain virtually unchanged serves as a clue that the Parsi imagination is still rooted in the world of the Vidyavat. Even if Parsi's individual doesn't literally believe in demon of corruption, the anxiety produced by death triggers a return to ancient, proven method of keeping the corruption at bay. The stage may be less crowded with minor character, but the lead actor, the angel of judgment, and the force of pollution remain as powerful as ever. So, with this understanding, we see that there is a continuity of the beliefs in myths and rituals, and that has helped to kind of maintain the identity of the Zoroastrian community. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.